I'd like to talk today about having courageous conversations and why that is an important thing for us to be able to do with our kids and with our students. So first I'd like to talk about why I'm even talking about this. As part of the 10th grade curriculum at Wellington in English, I teach To Kill a Mockingbird. And as we're getting into the unit, we talk about 3 different time periods. First of all, the 1930s, which was the setting of the book. Then the 1960s. Harper Lee wrote this book in 1960. And then we also talk about the present day. We start to talk about what issues remain prevalent from the 1930s to the 1960s to today. And the kids really pick up on this and have some really insightful things to talk about. And they begin asking questions. One mistake that I made in my class was that one day we were having one of these questions. It was at the end of the unit. We were focusing on what Atticus said about you never really understand someone until you step into his shoes. And so I decided to let the kids ask questions about each other. It was a pretty diverse class that year. And the focus of the conversation on what it was like to be black in America. And there were a couple of comments that ended up pivoting the conversation away from what we were focusing on. And the result of this was that a few of the African American students in my class gave up on the conversation. They were originally going to comment and they gave up on the conversation. And this really bothered me for all the rest of the day and the next day. And the fact that their voice had been stifled in class and that I had allowed that to happen. So I went and talked with Craig Jones, our upper school counselor, and he directed me to a book by Glenn Singleton called Courageous Conversations About Race. And so he and I worked together, and he helped me to develop a program to try and lay the foundation to begin having courageous conversations, to start off the 10th grade year with everyone kind of on the same page about what a courageous conversation is. So a courageous conversation engages those people who typically won't talk in class. It sustains the conversation when it gets uncomfortable or diverted. And it deepens the conversation to the point where authentic understanding and meaningful actions occur. So Craig and I start out each school year now with a whole class, the whole 10th grade class at once in the opening days of school, talking about courageous conversations. And in a little while I'm going to share with you the steps that we take as we talk about this with kids. But first let me say, I am not a perfect teacher. I'm not a perfect parent. My own 2 children will definitely attest to that. In fact, sometimes I think that it's harder to speak to my own kids than to my students. And as I thought about that, I began to consider why that is. What I came up with is that from the day that they were born, we spend our lives as parents trying to protect them and to raise them and to teach them all of the things that we feel that are important. They begin to question and assert their independence at some point. And that's a very frightening thing after we have tried to teach them the things that we want for them to start questioning. And that brings me to talking about fear. It is a fear that sometimes prevents us from having these courageous conversations. I remember when my mom used to tell me that her biggest fear was that she was going to get cancer. And one day, sure enough, she called us with the news that they had found a lump in her breast, had done a biopsy on it, and it had come back cancerous. She was devastated. She thought that this was the end for her. This was a death sentence for her. She went to the hospital, she had a mastectomy, and she went through chemo and radiation, and she got better. And she beat that. And then about 4 years later, it came back on the other side. But this time, she had been able to confront that fear and knew what to expect. They caught it earlier this time. She had the second mastectomy done. She did not need chemotherapy this time. She knew what to expect because she had already lived through that. She had confronted that fear. So we are all uncomfortable with these kinds of conversations. It's the fear of what we don't know, the fear what's going to happen to our kids. And this fear kind of drives me to ask these kids some essential questions during the trimester, one of which is, how do we react to people we don't understand? What's the benefit of gaining a better understanding of others? And what are the results of conflict between diverse groups of people. By embracing this fear, by confronting it and actually talking about it, we're going to grow from it. It is tough as parents to dive into these conversations with our kids, but by talking about it and talking about it often, that fear tends to dissipate. Now, this can be really tough. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. We do that. We take time and energy, and we talk about our kids all throughout their lives, about their morals and values and beliefs. And then our kids begin questioning us, even maybe questioning what their beliefs are. But by challenging the kids to work through their thoughts and work through their feelings, they gain a deeper understanding of what their morals and values and beliefs are, rather than acceptance just because of what they were taught. They understand why they believe that. My approach is that I try to come at this from a place of love and caring, in the hopes of strengthening relationships and helping kids work through the process of thinking. I'm not telling them what to think. I'm trying to get them to talk about how to think. So one thing I try and do with the kids is never to indicate that I know everything, because I don't. I had to work hard on that. I was used to being that teacher in the front of the classroom who had all the answers. I became more and more comfortable with saying, I don't know. Well, let's talk about that. What do you think? Let's look that up. And because I was able to express that vulnerability, show that vulnerability to the kids in turn knew that I, as an adult, didn't know everything, could question. They began more and more to trust me, to trust that conversation was going to be able to take place. Here's another thing that I like to talk with the kids about. Learning necessarily involves not merely risk, but sometimes the pain of giving up a former condition in favor of a new way of seeing things. We also talk in class about creating a brave space. The kids from a very early age are taught about what a safe space is, someplace that they can go. But the goal of a brave space is to encourage participants to be brave in exploring content that pushes them to the edges of their comfort zones in order to maximize learning. That's always the goal, in order to maximize learning. But we have to push them to the edges of those comfort zones to do it. This may mean that we're going to have controversy, but controversy with civility. This is where different views are expected and honored, with a group commitment to understand the sources of disagreement and to work cooperatively toward common solutions. It means understanding there is going to be disagreement, but we are pledged to try and work together to figure out where the common ground is. We talk to kids about owning their intentions and their impact. And that's two very different things. The impact of our actions is not always congruent with our intentions. Positive or neutral intentions do not weigh a negative impact. If I'm driving in a car and I end up swerving to hit a pothole and I accidentally hit another car, my intention was not to cause harm, but I still have to own that impact of what happened and to atone for that. So as we're talking with kids about what it means to have a courageous conversation, we tell them to keep in mind that there are 4 agreements. First, we ask them to stay engaged. We ask them not to shut off their ears from listening to other people and from trying to contribute to the conversation. We ask them to speak their truth. We don't want them to speak up for someone else. But we also don't want them to hide what it is that they are feeling and what it is that they are thinking, even if it feels like it's going to be an unpopular thing to express. They should expect to experience discomfort. As we said, learning comes from being pushed to the edges of our comfort zones. So they are going to experience discomfort with this. And finally, to expect and accept non-closure. At the end of a 40-minute or 80-minute class, it is not necessarily going to be all wrapped up into a nice little bun. At the end of a conversation, it's not going to be all wrapped up. There are times where we have to be able to just let things sit in the hopes maybe that we're going to come back the next time. As I said, practicing confronting that fear makes that fear go away. One final thing is the courageous conversation compass. And when we're speaking to kids, we ask them to think about where they might be during any individual conversation. Some people are going to approach it initially from a very moral standpoint. This is what I believe in my soul. Others are going to approach it from a more intellectual perspective, saying, well, this is what I think. It's all in my head, what I am thinking. Someone else could approach things initially from a rational point of view. Okay, that's fine, but what are the actions that we need to take? What are we going to do? What are we going to do on hands and feet to get this done? And then there are people that approach things from the emotional standpoint. This is what I am feeling. It comes from my heart. I have to admit, this is often where I begin when I'm having a conversation. I'm a very emotional person. So if I'm emotional about something, and I'm coming up against a person who is on the opposite end and is simply thinking about the intellectual, I'm going to have a hard time relating to that person because they're on the opposite end of the compass. So whatever we're doing, we're trying to have those conversations where we're recognizing where we fit in this compass, and we're trying to recognize where the other person is coming from as well. Again, we're always trying to work on finding where could we find some common ground here to be able to stand on. I hope that this has helped in trying to assist parents and others with talking with your own kids through courageous conversations. I would be happy to help more. You can always reach out to me, Chris Robbins, and my email address is robbins, ROBBINS, @wellington.org. Thank you.